Thanks again for joining us for our meeting. And this meeting, unlike many meetings on the complicated issue of reproductive rights and how we are going to protect our rights as much as possible, we're looking forward to particularly learning what the solutions are to protect our reproductive rights. Though, of course, with learning about the solutions, we have to learn about all of the threats to those solutions that the states and locals are endangering us with. So we're going to, particularly with Shaina's presentation, look at the federal solutions. There are lots of ways that the federal government is thankfully looking at its vast array of resources and influence and protections to assure whatever it can with reproductive rights, even in states that try to make them illegal. Now I'd like to give you a little bit of background. You all saw the information in our invitation page. We're delighted to have Shaina Goodman from the National Partnership for Women and Families address the very important federal and other considerations to help protect our reproductive rights. Shaina is the Director for Reproductive Health and Rights at the National Partnership, and she's very qualified, and we're extremely lucky to have her. She received her JD and Master's in Social Work and Bachelor's degree in Women and Gender Studies from Washington University in St. Louis, and she has her law license in Maryland. And I already told you what she was going to focus on, but in addition, I learned from Shaina that she's the mother of 2 toddlers, 1 year and 3 years old. So a very busy woman, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise with us so much. Later on, we'll be joined by Jamie Lockhart, who checked in, and her equipment is working beautifully. She's in a meeting already with the Virginia State House in Richmond, with the committee and other members who are working on reproductive rights. And she's the executive director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia, another young woman, mother of a toddler. And we're grateful to have both of these young women leaders and with expertise in this important area that we have to continue to defend ourselves on. So without any more introduction, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Shaina, and she will be sharing slides and other things. So
great.
Thank you. As you all see, the meeting is being recorded. So thank you so much, Shaina.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Give me just 1 second. Let me share my slides. Should be good. Let me know in the chat if you're having any problems seeing the slides. So I wanted to just give you all some information and context about what's happening at the federal level and what has been happening over the last 6 months in response to the Dobbs decision. Before we dig into the federal response, I think it's important to look at the state landscape and get a really clear understanding of where things are currently. Our friends at the Guttmacher Institute are doing a wonderful job of tracking state laws and policies. And this map is current as of just a couple of days ago. You can see the dark red are the states that have the most restrictive laws and bans on abortion. And then moving all the way toward the dark blue, Oregon over here, California, Washington, the states that have done more to protect abortion access. Guttmacher's analysis shows that there are 24 states that have banned or are likely to ban abortion following the end of Roe. That's, a good chunk of the states, more than half, almost half. And the landscape is changing rapidly as state bans go into effect, as they're litigated and blocked by the courts, only to be put back into effect later. There's a lot of back and forth at the state level, and there's a lot of confusion and chaos on the ground. For people seeking abortion care, the back and forth and the uncertainty is extremely difficult. It makes it very hard to understand and to know what an individual person's rights are, where they can get help, where the nearest place is that abortion care might be available, and the kinds of logistical and financial hurdles that folks will need to overcome in order to get care. So imagine, for example, you're someone here in Mississippi and have to travel to Florida or South Carolina, Illinois, the closest blue state. It's incredibly difficult to financially be able to afford to travel those long distances. The majority of people who have abortions are already mothers, so figuring out things like childcare, lodging, transportation, taking time off work, time that's usually not paid for the majority of workers. So this landscape is really, really dire, as I think all of us are aware. Even in the blue states, things are difficult. Folks are dealing with large influxes of patients from out of state seeking care in places like California, New Mexico, Colorado. There are really long wait times for abortion care in those states to deal with the influx of out of state patients, in addition to in-state residents who continue to need abortion care. So even though there are these wonderful states that have done as much as they can, or have done a lot of things to protect abortion access, that doesn't mean that it's easy in those states either. Other stories that we are hearing from the ground about what this landscape is looking like post-Roe is that providers have significant difficulty in understanding and knowing what kind of medical care they can and can't provide. And they feel like their hands are tied. They're not able to provide the kind of medical care that they are trained to provide, that they know they should provide. And instead, legal teams and hospital, counsel's offices are dictating the kinds of care that can be provided based on their assessment of state laws. We're hearing stories of pregnant people being told, who are losing pregnancies, you have to go home and come back when you're in sepsis. Your medical emergency is not enough of an emergency for us to be confident that we can provide abortion care to you now. Or, patients who are not pregnant and are prescribed medication for conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune diseases. But because those medications might end a pregnancy, they're being denied access to their medications. Again, these are people who are not pregnant. It's, these are the kinds of stories that have come out over the last 6 months since the Dobbs decision. And it is what we as advocates feared would happen. And it's even worse than I think we had feared and imagined. And the tentacles of the Dobbs decision are further reaching than I think many of us expected in terms of the implications and the consequences. And again, just so many so many things that we're seeing play out now that speak to just how important having access to abortion care is in its own right, but also for women and people's and families' health more broadly and their economic security as well. So with that as the sort of background landscape, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that the federal administration has done to respond to this crisis. I'll start with some of the higher level things that have come directly from the president and the vice president themselves, directly out of the White House. So they've created an interagency task force on reproductive health access, which pulls cabinet level officials and other high ranking administration officials from across the federal government to come together to think strategically about what kinds of actions the federal agencies in the White House can and should be taking in response to Dobbs and the crisis in reproductive health care access. They've set up a website, reproductiverights.gov, which has comprehensive information on accessing abortion care and the state of the laws across the country. Biden has issued 2 executive orders so far, directing agencies to take a myriad of different actions, which I'll talk about in more detail in a minute, what those actions look like. They've also convened, and the vice president has really been at the head of these roundtable discussions, a series of, I've lost count, I think it's well over a dozen at this point, of roundtable conversations, hearing from different advocates and leaders across the country, everyone from frontline abortion providers to federal advocates to providers like OBGYNs and other medical providers, to faith leaders who believe that there is a role for faith to support abortion access, to mayors and governors and cities and states that are being proactive and doing good work to protect abortion access, to civil rights organizations. I mean, there's the gamut of folks that the vice president in particular has done a really wonderful job of speaking to and learning from and listening to. They've also used the power of the federal government and the president and the vice president, what we sometimes call their bully pulpit, their ability to publicly message issues and to talk about what's important and what's critical, and really, be persuasive about the importance of this issue to the general public. So those are some of the high level things that the administration has done. I'll talk a little bit more now about the specifics of many of the actions that they've taken. The Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, to no surprise, has been really leading the way. One of the first things, and these are sort of in timeline order, not necessarily in order of importance. All of these actions are important, and the scope of them, varies. But anyway, one of the first actions that HHS took was there's a law that's a longstanding law, I think since the 80s, called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which basically says that if someone shows up to a hospital in an emergency, having a medical emergency, the hospital is required to treat them. So HHS issued guidance to clarify that this law, EMTALA, includes abortion care, meaning that if someone shows up having a medical emergency and the thing that will stabilize that patient is giving the patient an abortion, then hospitals are required to provide that care, because that's what's necessary under EMTALA to stabilize the patient and ensure that they are no longer in the midst of a medical emergency. HHS also directed pharmacies to fill prescriptions for contraception or other prescriptions, including those that may be used to terminate a pregnancy. So that solves part of that challenge I was describing earlier. You show up, you have arthritis, your prescription is mifepristone or methotrexate, which can also be used to terminate a pregnancy. You're not pregnant, but the pharmacy is refusing to fill your prescription anyway. HHS said you cannot do that. HHS has also proposed a rule implementing Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. Section 1557 is also known as the Healthcare Rights Law. Among other things, it prohibits discrimination in healthcare on the basis of sex. And the department in the proposed rule defines sex to include pregnancy status, which also includes on the basis of termination of pregnancy. This is just right now a proposed rule. The government is in the process of reviewing the comments that they received from the public, and will hopefully finalize the rule implementing 1557 in the not too distant future. If they finalize the rule in the same way that was detailed in the proposal, this would be one of the most transformative and impactful actions that the federal government has taken to shore up access to abortion care and reproductive health care, by saying that access to abortion is, or failing to provide abortion care could constitute sex discrimination. So this would be really a landmark change in policy. We'll again have to kind of wait and see a little bit about how the federal government finalizes the rule. We also know that this is almost certainly to be litigated, so it may be a while before we kind of see how 1557 will play out on the ground as it goes through the process of litigation. More things that HHS has done. So Medicaid, as many folks may know, is a federal and state partnership. So there are aspects of how Medicaid works that states can control. And the federal government has invited states to submit what's called an 1115 waiver, which enables states to do what are basically like demonstration projects under Medicaid to try and expand or tinker with how Medicaid works within their state. So HHS has said to states, we encourage you to use the 1115 waiver process to expand access to care to individuals traveling into your state from states that may have banned or restricted abortion, and to see if there are pathways to using state Medicaid funding to help those folks access abortion care in friendly states. HHS also administers, or part of HHS's jurisdiction is the Office for Refugee Resettlement, which has responsibilities for unaccompanied immigrant or migrant children. So whereas adults are processed through the Department of Homeland Security, minors are processed through ORR in HHS. So HHS has said to all of its field staff that for unaccompanied migrant children who may want abortion care, it is your job as field staff to help facilitate access to care, to abortion care for those minors. And that unaccompanied minors who are pregnant should be, if at all possible, located in states without abortion bans, as opposed to being placed when they come into this country in states with abortion bans. Folks may remember during the Trump years, there was a fairly high-profile case of an unaccompanied migrant minor who was pregnant and wanted an abortion. And the head of the Office for Refugee Resettlement basically denied her ability to access that care. So this is not only good policy, but it's sort of a direct response to that situation that happened a few years ago. The FDA has also taken really significant action lately. One thing about the FDA is that even though it is technically part of HHS, FDA really operates independently as a non-political, non-partisan agency that's supposed to be guided by the science. So one thing that's really great about these actions that the FDA has taken is that they're really grounded in the evidence and in the research about abortion care and about reproductive health care, and aren't able, or our hope at least, is that they're not able to be politicized in the same way as other actions that the federal administration has taken, because it is the FDA and they're acting with that independent authority. So two things that the FDA has done recently, which were really wonderful. The first is that they updated the label on Plan B, which is a name brand emergency contraception, to clarify that emergency contraception is not an abortifacient and does not terminate an existing pregnancy. That language has been really important because we are concerned and have good reason to be concerned that state legislatures are going to come after emergency contraception in the not too distant future. And so having the FDA say emphatically that emergency contraception is not an abortifacient is really important. And as again, like the science totally backs this up. So the FDA should have been clear on this all along, and it's good that they are now very clear about this. Also, very recently, within the last couple of weeks, the FDA changed the REMS guidelines for mifepristone, which is one of the medications used in medication abortion. And the FDA made two very significant changes to the REMS. The first is that they lifted the requirement that mifepristone be dispensed in person. So this enables telehealth provision of medication abortion. The FDA also created a program which enables both brick and mortar and mail order pharmacies to dispense mifepristone. So what used to happen was that only providers could basically like fill a prescription for Miffy. So it had to be, you had to get mifepristone directly from your doctor. Now, like any other medication or like most other medications, your doctor can write a script and you can go to your local CVS or Walgreens, or if you prefer to have to use the mail order pharmacy, you can do that. And you can have your medication abortion pills mailed to you or pick them up from your local pharmacy. It's going to take a little bit of time for pharmacies to actually be part of this program. And there are still some requirements that pharmacies have to, some hoops that they have to jump through in order to participate. So this is not an immediate change, but both CVS and Walgreens have said that they are interested in becoming certified pharmacies under this program. And so hopefully in the coming months, this will be a reality and people can get their medication abortion from their pharmacy. So those are some of the really big actions that the federal government has taken so far. There are also quite a few other ones that may seem small, but are no less impactful. I'm going to run through them quickly as well. The first is that the Office of Personnel Management, which is sort of like the HR arm of the federal government, clarified that for federal employees and contractors, paid sick days can be used to cover the travel time that you need to get medical care. So that's helpful for people that have to travel long distances, obviously, to get abortion care and that work for the federal government. This is great. The FTC, one issue that's really surfacing post-Dobbs is technology and people's private or sensitive health data and where that's being stored and shared and who has access. So the FTC put out a public statement that they are committed to robustly enforcing the current laws that prohibit the illegal use of people's highly sensitive data. Again, not a new policy, but strong enforcement from the FTC, which is really helpful. I mentioned EMTALA earlier. The Department of Justice sued Idaho, arguing that their state abortion ban violated EMTALA because it did not contain an exception for the life of the pregnant person, and DOJ won that lawsuit, so that's great. The Department of Veterans Affairs issued what's called an interim final rule, which allows the VA to provide abortion counseling and for veterans and allows for abortion care in some limited circumstances. This is great because previously the VA had provided no abortion care or counseling. So this is definitely an expansion and helpful for veterans who need care. The Department of Education issued guidance on Title 9, which Title 9 is the prohibition on discrimination in educational institutions. And Department of Ed guidance clarified that Title IX's prohibition on sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, which includes pregnancy termination. The Department of Defense, in an exciting and really surprising move, established travel and transportation allowances for service members and their dependents who need to travel to get abortion care if it can't be provided on the base. This is a really significant expansion for folks serving in the military. Oops, sorry. And then last but certainly not least, the Department of Justice just recently issued an opinion that the U.S. Postal Service is permitted to deliver packages that contain medication abortion pills. There's a very, very old law on the books called the Comstock Act, which the Postal Service was concerned might limit their ability to actually deliver medication abortion pills legally. But the Department of Justice, within the last few weeks, clarified that no, the Comstock Act is not a bar to their ability to deliver such packages through the mail. So that's a lot of actions, actually. And it's funny, you know, when we're in it, we've been in this like crisis moment post Dobbs, as advocates, we have felt a lot of urgency and a lot of need for the federal government to take significant action. And many of us have felt like the administration has not been as bold as we had hoped that they would be. But when I was putting together this presentation and saw all in one place the list of things that they've done, it's actually like really considerable. And I think the administration has done a lot of significant work in the last 6 months to use all of the levers at their disposal to shore up abortion access wherever they can. I think there's lots more to do, and that is, you know, my core job is to continue to push the administration to do all of the things that it can, and to keep moving forward, keep taking actions. But it's exciting to see that full list over the last 6 months. So what is next, in addition to more agency actions that we hope the administration will take? Jamie is going to talk a lot more about this when she is able to join us, but state legislative sessions are starting up now. Most states are in session like January through early summer-ish, so that we expect a lot of activity in the states, both in red states as well as in blue states. So I expect that the extremes are going to move further and further apart as more states work to prohibit abortion on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are more states that move to protect abortion access. I think it's likely that we'll see fewer of those states in the middle. There's also federal legislation pending, some of it good, some of it terrible. One of the first actions that this new Republican-led House took in the last couple of weeks was to pass what they call a Born Alive bill, which doesn't address a real problem from our perspective. It's really like messaging scare tactic from anti-abortion legislators, but signals very clearly where the Republican House would like for things to go. I think we're also on alert for the possibility of a federal 15-week abortion ban. Senator Lindsey Graham has proposed such a bill, and it's, it wouldn't pass right now, and Biden would never sign such a bill into law, but it is on the horizon as a possibility. There are also pro-abortion, pro-choice senators and members of the House who are working very hard on great legislation, addressing things like data privacy, strengthening HIPAA protections for patient health information, getting rid of the Hyde Amendment once and for all so that there's no longer a bar to Medicaid, federal Medicaid funding for abortion care, and all sorts of other, big and small legislative vehicles to protect abortion access at the federal level. And the Biden administration continues to call on Congress to codify Roe as well. I mentioned additional agency actions that we're working on, and then litigation. As I hinted at earlier, I think there's a very strong possibility that many of the things that the federal government does will be litigated at the state, by folks in the states, work their way up through the federal court system. Some may eventually wind up at the Supreme Court. There's also litigation over state bans. Recently, the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the state's abortion ban violated the state constitution's guarantee of privacy. So I think we will see ongoing litigation at the state level. And then I think what we're also going to start to see is litigation between states. Some of the blue states have passed laws doing things like protecting, let's say, for example, a person in Texas travels to California to get an abortion, and then they go back home. California has passed laws protecting that California provider from being sued in Texas. California has also passed what's called an information blocking statute, protecting or requiring that California-based technology companies not share personal information of people if that information is being used in abortion-related investigations or lawsuits in another state. So I think what we're going to start to see is conflicts between states as state laws start to butt up against each other. And this is brand new territory. I think we don't know how these interstate conflicts are going to play out. So will be interesting at the sort of I'm a lawyer. It's interesting to me at the intellectual level. And in the meantime, of course, unfortunately, people are going to continue to be denied care, are going to have a hard time getting the abortions that they need or want. And so, I'm the lawyer in me has to remember that there are real humans at the end of this who are impacted every single day by the ongoing bans in states. And I know Jamie's going to talk a little bit more about how the fight at the state levels are really playing out. So I think I will stop there. And Jamie, I know you are in between meetings and in your state capital and doing all kinds of things. So I don't know, Jamie, based on your timing, whatever's best for you, if you want to jump in and give your part of the presentation and then we come back to Q&A, or if you want me to take Q&A now, you tell me what works for your schedule.
I'm happy to jump in now.
Great, I will pass it to you.
Great, I'm also gonna share my screen. Great. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Lockhart. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia. And so we are a C4 organization based here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and our focus is on protecting access to critical sexual and reproductive health care. And I know Shaina just talked a lot about this, so I will scroll through some slides quickly and then get on to talking about some Virginia-specific information. But as was covered, there are abortion bans that have eliminated all or some access in 18 states. 13 states have pretty much complete bans. And then there are some states that have Georgia with their 6-week ban, and then 4 states that have bans between 15 and 20 weeks. We're also very closely watching the legislative sessions in South Carolina, Florida, North Carolina, to see what happens during those legislative sessions, knowing that there are legislators there that are very focused on doing what they can to restrict access. Again, a similar map. This is from Kaiser Family Foundation, but wanted to point out just how critical Virginia is in really making sure that there is access for folks in the South and Southeast, especially as I just mentioned, expecting North Carolina to Florida to try to do everything they can to further restrict past what they currently have and what their courts have currently allowed. So just a quick overview on Virginia and what our government looks like. And then I'll go into some of the bills we're watching and kind of where we are with our session. So as a result of our November 2021 elections, we have anti-reproductive rights Republicans who control the three main statewide offices: governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Governor Glenn Youngkin has made clear that he will pursue an abortion ban, and he said that he would sign kind of any anti-abortion legislation that gets to his desk. The lieutenant governor is extremely anti-abortion as well. She said during the campaign that she would support a Texas-style ban after that had just taken effect. And the governor can sign, amend, veto, or allow bills to become law. So our General Assembly, we have a state Senate and a state House of Delegates. Our state Senate is 40 senators. As a result of a recent special election, there's now 22 Democrats and 18 Republicans. We do have one Democratic state senator that has in the past sponsored an abortion ban and has also voted against attempts to expand access to reproductive health care. So we're kind of at a 21 to 18/19 pro-abortion rights majority. And it was really critical that we just picked up this seat in a special election because the lieutenant governor is the tie-breaking vote in our state Senate. And so we're now in a much better position to not likely have to have a 2020 tie in our Senate. Majority Leader is Dick Saslaw. And then another thing about kind of our process is that we have a committee process, and it's critical for us to stop bills using the committee process and not let bills get to the floor for them to be amended and voted on there. So our abortion related bills in the state Senate go through our Senate Education and Health Committee, which has 9 Democrats and 6 Republicans. So we feel confident in being able to stop abortion bans through our state Senate committee process. Our House of Delegates is made up of 100 delegates. There are 48 Democrats who all are supportive of abortion rights, and there's 52 Republicans who unfortunately have all supported abortion bans or anti-abortion legislation last session. Last session, there were kind of 2 main abortion bills that got a vote in the House, one on requiring bias counseling and a so-called Born Alive bill. And both of those passed the House on partisan votes. So right now we're in the throes of the Virginia General Assembly session. I was there this morning for a press conference. I ran to my office to be with you all, to have a little bit of quiet space. And then I'm going to be running back down to the Capitol. Our session began on January 11th. It's likely to run for 45 days. Our Constitution says that it runs for 30 days with an opportunity to be extended to 45. So typically in our short session years, which this is one of them, it'll run for 45 days. We just passed the deadline to introduce legislation. Bills are introduced in the House or Senate. They go through a committee process. If they pass through the committee, they go to the floor. And then our crossover day is February 8th. So everything that passed the House then goes to the Senate and vice versa. And then the process repeats. Bills go to the governor. And then if the governor decides to veto or amend bills, they go back to the legislature when they meet on typically one day. They call that the veto session, and that's happening on April 12th. So it's a quick sprint here in Virginia to go through hundreds, if not thousands, of bills. And so I wanted to kind of start off and acknowledge that in Virginia, we're in a much better place than a lot of other states, because for 2 years we had a pro-reproductive rights trifecta and made great progress during those years. So we passed a bill that we called the Reproductive Health Protection Act, and that repealed a lot of medically unnecessary restrictions. So we got rid of the required bias counseling, a mandatory ultrasound, got rid of a mandatory 24-hour delay before someone could have an abortion, as well as the targeted restrictions on abortion providers. That legislation also expanded who can provide care. So now in Virginia, as of a couple of years ago, nurse practitioners and certified nurse midwives can provide first trimester abortion care in addition to physicians. We also, over the last several years, have expanded access to birth control. We have a state program that provides LARCs, long-acting reversible contraception, but as well as other forms of birth control. And we repealed a restriction on our health insurance exchange that said that plans could not cover abortion. And we also have been working hard to maintain our progress in protecting access to transgender healthcare. So our 2023 legislative priorities, our number one priority is protecting access to essential time-sensitive sexual and reproductive health care. And on the proactive side, we have kind of two main priorities, and we'll be supporting some other bills, but the kind of two main ones we're focused on is supporting a constitutional amendment that protects reproductive freedom in Virginia. And I was at a press conference for this morning, and this afternoon, there's a subcommittee on the Senate side that is going to be considering this constitutional amendment. It's a long process in Virginia, unlike other states where you can get a number of signatures and then get on the ballot. Here in Virginia, you have to pass a constitutional amendment through the legislature twice with an intervening election. So it would have to pass this year and then pass again after we have this elections this November. Knowing the makeup of our House of Delegates, we're working hard to pass it this year, but knowing that we don't have that majority there, it's more likely that we're able to actually make it happen in 2025 and 2026, and then being on the ballot in 2026. Assuming, we do our work to have the right champions in the General Assembly. We're also supporting a Contraceptive Equity Act to protect coverage for contraception and really kind of codify the Affordable Cares Act contraceptive mandate and making sure that continues here in Virginia. So a lot of stuff on the defensive side. And we knew after Governor Youngkin was elected and after an anti-abortion majority was elected in the House of Delegates that we would be spending a lot of our time focused on defeating bad bills. One of our top priorities is opposing any abortion ban. We know that the goal of all abortion bans is to stop people from accessing essential health care and to take away their power over their own bodies, lives, and futures. We're opposing so-called born alive bills, which are vehicles for anti-abortion politicians to push information. We're opposing bills that undermine the teaching of comprehensive, medically accurate family life education, opposing bills which seek to politicize the fair treatment of transgender youth. And then also, this year is not a main budget year in Virginia, but they do amend last year's budget. And so there are some harmful budget amendments that we're also tracking. So a little bit more on the attacks. So there's the governor is supporting a 15-week abortion ban, which looking forward to being defeated this Thursday morning in the Senate Education and Health Committee. There's also a number of bills or resolutions to ban abortion completely, and that also have implications for emergency contraceptives like IUDs and in vitro fertilization. And then there's a number of other House bills that would either restrict abortion or, are really just trying to be stigmatizing messaging bills for those that are against abortion. So there's a bill to reinstate mandatory bias counseling and requiring nurse practitioners and physicians to read a script that's written by the state and has biased information. There's an abortion ban that says someone cannot get an abortion for certain reasons, which we know is, again, to stigmatize care and put providers in really tough positions. There's a kind of a defund Planned Parenthood or reproductive health care providers bill that would say any organization that provides abortion in the Commonwealth of Virginia could not get state funding for other programs. So it would there are legislators that are willing to cut off access to critical healthcare and programming, like the teen pregnancy prevention program and the free birth control program, because they're so against abortion. And then there's also a so-called Born Alive bill, which I'll say a little bit more about. And Governor Youngkin has also proposed a budget amendment that would force low-income Virginians to carry pregnancies with severe fetal diagnoses. So in our state code, Virginia can only cover the cost of abortions in very rare circumstances, instances of rape, incest, the life of the mother or pregnant person, or in a situation where there's a severe fetal diagnosis. And these are people who are eligible for Medicaid. So lower income Virginians can have the Virginia Department of Health pay for their abortions in very rare circumstances. In the last couple of fiscal years, it's been 20 or 30 cases. And so Governor Youngkin is trying to remove that from the state budget. And just one quick note on so-called Born Alive bills, which we just saw one before Congress, and we've seen them in Virginia, we've seen them in states across the country. And just want to make sure folks know that this is an entirely fabricated political concept, and that these are all about really stigmatizing healthcare and making it sound like something happens that doesn't happen in healthcare. And so we call them out for what they are. And we know that they're just attempts by those who really want to completely ban abortion, to really continue to stigmatize abortion. And I think the kind of a common question or refrain from those that are opposed to abortion right now in Virginia, and the governor isn't a 15-week ban reasonable, or isn't this a compromise? And we want to be clear that a ban is a ban, and that the goal of this ban, as well as all abortion bans, is to stop people from accessing essential health care. Abortion bans limit a person's agency and freedom. We know who they disproportionately impact, which are people who are Black, Brown, LGBTQ, people with low incomes, younger folks in immigrant communities, those that are already marginalized. And that also a lack of access delays care. We know we're seeing more folks in Virginia for care who, are getting care later than they would like because their states have bans, and they've had delays in accessing the care that they need, taking time off, getting the financial resources to be able to travel and access care. And, we know that the same people who are pushing a 15-week ban in Virginia are also pushing total bans, and that their overall strategy is clear: put up unnecessary barriers that force patients to delay care, then ban abortion earlier and early in pregnancy, and that these bans represent political interference in personal health care decisions at its worst. And with any kind of gestational ban, that it's important to remember that each pregnancy and each circumstance is unique, and that one size fits all laws don't work. So one thing that I appreciate working for Planned Parenthood is I get to talk to a lot of providers and hear their stories, and hear, really hearing stories about kind of complex pregnancy situations and how they had to use their best judgment in advising a patient, and that these are really tough decisions that they go to medical school for years, and not something that politicians should arbitrarily be making decisions about and, drawing lines. And so one thing I just want to point out too, I'm sure folks on here know and agree, but that support for abortion access is high. We know that over 3 in 4 Americans support abortion rights, and that nearly 80% of Virginians believe abortion should be legal. And then also, if you're talking to somebody who, may have a different view, that, acknowledging one's personal feelings, but we can all agree that it's not the place of politicians to make this decision for someone else. So a little bit about what's next in Virginia. So our legislative session runs through February 25th. I mentioned the reconvene session on April 12th. And then we're kind of off to the races. Virginia has off-year elections. So June 20th, we have our primaries for 2023, and we have a ton of primaries because these are our first post redistricting elections. And our maps were drawn by special masters through a process and that didn't take incumbency addresses into account. So we're going to have a lot of new elected officials in Virginia come next year. And then our general election is November 7th, 2023, and all 140 of our state legislative seats are on the ballot this November. Our next statewide races are 2025. So we know we have Governor Youngkin and his anti-abortion views to contend with for the next several years. And so for us, it is going to be more defensive. You know, we will be putting forward proactive efforts, and hopefully we can keep moving a constitutional amendment forward. But knowing that a lot of what we want to do long-term of increasing access, we're not able to do with Governor Youngkin in office. And then I mentioned too, the campaign for constitutional amendment with hopefully when we increase in gain majorities in the House of Delegates and strengthen a majority in the state Senate, we can pass a constitutional amendment during the 2025 and 2026 legislative sessions to then go to voters in November 2026. So for folks that might be interested in helping and taking action, and I can put some links in the chat and also share them with CWI's leadership, but we have a rapid response team where we send out messages about opportunities to take action. We also, I can share, there's a letter from healthcare professionals in opposition to abortion bans that's currently being circulated. If you're a Virginian or you can share this with Virginians, there's opportunities to testify against these bills. You can join us this Thursday in Richmond for our lobby day, and then also get involved in our elections to make sure we have the champions we need to take action, you know, donating to advocacy organizations and abortion funds, and then also just talking to your friends and family about abortion to kind of destigmatize abortion as healthcare, which we know 1 out of 4 women of reproductive age will access, and more people who can become pregnant will access abortion as well. And so that's the end of my slides. I will stop sharing in a moment, but also if anyone has any questions for me or about our work in Virginia, you can send us a note to info@ppav.org.
Thank you so much, Shaina and Jamie. Those were fantastic presentations. And now all of the participants in this Zoom meeting, please feel free to raise your hand and ask your question. Any questions? Any questions?
I have a question. I appreciate the presentations by both of you. Thank you very, very much. And I'd already asked Shaina to share why it was that Oregon was the most protective of the states nationwide. And I found your answer very interesting. And my question to both of you is what's happened or what has happened in Oregon being used as a prototype for other states. And truly, I understand Virginia. I live in Maryland and I've watched Virginia for decades, so I understand the current challenges you're under. But I'm just wondering if there's anything that can be done similar to what has happened in Oregon. For instance, up in New Jersey, you've got a very, pro-abortion governor. Is there anything going on in states of that type to move it closer to an Oregon model versus what currently exists? I have a daughter in Tennessee, and it is just heartbreaking to know that will never change for at least a couple of generations, if that. So I'm just wondering, can we make the blue states bluer?
Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay. I know from colleagues I talked to, there are definitely attempts to do so, to make sure they do everything they can to increase access, to protect providers, and really move in that direction, and really move in a way of focusing on equity and making sure that access to abortion isn't limited based on your zip code and your income and your immigration status. And so I know that in those states there are attempts, and both looking at how do they protect the right, like how do they need to make sure they have something in their constitution or code so that that right is protected no matter who is in elected office, but also really focusing on who has access and how they make sure that they continue to increase access and protect access. And I know one issue in a lot of states when it comes to access is reimbursement rates, and how folks who are on Medicaid, the states limit how much providers are reimbursed for seeing Medicaid patients. And so making sure that those reimbursement rates are high enough so that providers do want to see the folks that are earning low incomes in their state. So sometimes that work has to happen in conjunction to make sure as they're taking away restrictions, they're also making it so that folks who are lower income can use their health insurance to actually access this sexual and reproductive health care.
And so, Jamie, does that happen as a state legislative issue, or are they regulatory issues, or are they private insurance issues, or all of the above?
All of the above. Yeah. And I think, all the health insurance stuff is so complicated. I know here in Virginia, they have a whole kind of separate committee that meets outside of legislative session to work through some health insurance issues, and that you often have to simultaneously be working at kind of on the private insurance angle and on the public insurance side. And that states don't regulate I believe in Virginia, only about 30% of Virginians have insurance that this is state regulated. There's a lot that's federally regulated. So even if they work through what they can at the state level, they don't have control over to make all those protections and really increase that access. And Shaina might know more about how all the insurance markets work that way.
So it truly does sound like we need to get into the weeds in order to work on a state by state basis, which is crazy. And hopefully if other options, especially at the voting level, and if in fact we get the numbers and the people that we need at a federal level or state level, we don't have to do that. But I'm guessing despite whatever gets passed, whether it's even the equal rights amendment being, finally put into the Constitution, these will still be issues we'll need to deal with on a federal and state and private insurance level. Is that correct? I mean, maybe we just need to bite the bullet and start doing it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think getting in the weeds is totally right. And I think, part of what Jamie was, I think, alluding to, and, it's one thing to have laws on the books, it's another thing to guarantee meaningful access. And I think part of the meaningful access project involves, one, getting into the weeds on some really technical stuff. And I think two, that's really important, is creating new coalitions. Reproductive health and rights folks are now becoming expert in things like state Medicaid policy, or data privacy, or health technology, or economic security, or whatever these issues are that are surfacing in the wake of Dobbs. Some folks on the ground have been doing work in those spaces for a really long time, but I think we are at the point in the movement now where building those alliances across issues, really leaning on the expertise that others have, and finding ways to collaborate and use other people's technical expertise in service of our goals of protecting and expanding reproductive and sexual health for all people. That's the inflection point we're at now, and it is going to take all of us at all different levels to make the world that we want a reality.
Right. Is there another question?
Thank you both.
Thanks, Marlissa, for your question. Any other questions?
I have one. I have one. Okay, so you're in a rural restrictive state and you seek an abortion. Who do you even talk to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there are wonderful organizations like Planned Parenthood, like many, many others who are trying to make information as publicly available as possible so that no matter where you are, hopefully you can at least access information. I think providers feel incredibly constrained. Oftentimes, your healthcare provider should be someone that you can talk through these questions with and have that confidential, trusted relationship with about, what are someone's options who's become pregnant, who may not want to be pregnant. But providers don't feel like they can speak honestly and fully with their patients in some of these states. And that's a real problem, not just in terms of abortion care, but in terms of like a functioning healthcare system writ large. So yeah, it's incredibly challenging. It's very difficult. I think, but there are folks, websites, abortion funds, folks who are really trying to make sure that people have medically accurate, non-judgmental, non-stigmatizing information. And then for people who do decide to seek abortion care, that they're connected as best as possible to the resources and supports that they'll need to get that care. But it's challenging. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It's really difficult.
One thing I'll add is that even in states where abortion is now banned, folks, can call healthcare providers and they can refer folks elsewhere. One position that I wish we didn't have to hire for now, but we now have in a lot of states, is the role of a patient navigator. And so I'm here at the Virginia League for Planned Parenthood in Richmond, and there are 2 people on staff whose whole job it is to help people get to appointments and help people who are going to be traveling from out of state and, make suggestions to them on here's a hotel to stay at, or, let us know your flight information so that we can check. And, if you have this appointment at this time and your flight is delayed or canceled, we can help figure it out for you. So there is a whole, in addition to abortion funds, which are helping do this work, kind of a whole network of patient navigators who are also helping get people to appointments. And I was on a call the other day with some folks that work in the call center at Planned Parenthood. And I was really surprised to hear from one of the call center representatives that she said that 9 out of 10 people who call to schedule an abortion start out the conversation with, do you still provide abortions? And I was really surprised to hear that for, being in Virginia, where abortion is legal and where we have less restrictions than a lot of other places, and especially regionally. So I think there's just been so much kind of fear and confusion about what sort of access is currently available, and kind of seeing the national news about the restrictions. Even in places where abortion is legal, there's confusion and people and concern about when access could be cut off.
Great. Other questions? Other questions? No other questions at the moment?
I'll have one more. This is hard to gauge, I know, but do you hear from people who regretted their decision for voting for someone who was so anti-abortion?
In Virginia, I don't know that I've had a lot of personal conversations, but I've kind of heard from others that they've met people who thought like, oh, well, the governor or, Glenn Youngkin seems like a moderate. He's not actually going to do anything on this. And so, we know that there are a lot of folks out there who voted for him for other reasons and are now being like, wait a minute, I didn't
Vote for that. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't vote for that. And so, and we also know here in Virginia that the House hasn't brought forth their abortion bans yet. And we know that the Republican legislators know that how unpopular they are. And so they're trying to downplay it as an issue because just as kind of Glenn Youngkin was caught on a secret video in July of 2021 saying, I can't talk about that because I'll lose independent voters. And I think we're seeing the acknowledgement there of this is not a winning issue for people who are anti-abortion. So they're trying to downplay what they would actually do if they had the power to do it.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, I think that we saw the ballot initiatives across the country in November that, 5 for 5, the pro-abortion side won on those ballot measures. And JB included the statistic about, it's like more than 70% of the public supports abortion access. And so we know that when the voters have the opportunity to speak directly on abortion issues where they are, I think it speaks to, both the partisan nature of our politics these days that, and also gerrymandering and voting rights. One thing that we talk a lot about at the National Partnership is the connection between abortion rights and voting rights, and how it's the same people that want to dismantle access to abortion care as want to dismantle the power of people at the ballot box and in the voting booth, in particular, people of color, low income folks, young folks. So there's a real disconnect between, the number of seats and the power that anti-abortion politicians hold and the popularity of their positions, not just on abortion, but on a whole lot of other things. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that voters, know and understand what these politicians stand for when it comes time to vote, and that we fight against voter suppression, because when we know that when people have the ability to vote, they vote in favor of abortion access. So linking those two things is really important as well.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
So, Sue, I was just going to mention, I did some work this past election on college campuses in different states. And I was very surprised, I don't know why, but the whole aspect of voter suppression, which states were basically very helpful to younger populations, particularly college campuses, having access to voter polls on campus or close to campus versus making them go across the city or across a county to get to a voting poll. I'm not sure what Virginia looks like, but Jamie was going to ask you, do you feel that enough is being done? Are there groups that are helping you sort of organize and orchestrate those voter populations, those younger voter populations, which I think will be very positive on this issue as well as others in terms of identifying for them how they can vote in the Virginia elections, how they can change their voter registration, and where they can vote? Do you think that is something that is that could be helpful, or do you think it's being done, or people don't want to step on other people's toes unless there's a need for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there could always be more support that way. There was an organization called Next Gen that was specifically organizing college students. And unfortunately, I think Virginia is no longer a priority state for them. And so I think we were in a better position when we did have an organization dedicated to doing that organizing. Planned Parenthood runs some college chapters called Planned Parenthood Generation Action. So we do have some student groups that we work with. We are in a much better position than we used to be in Virginia when it comes to voting rights. So we used to be near the bottom, and now we're at least in the top half. We expanded early voting to 45 days. And we also, in the last couple of years, now have same-day voter registration, so people can show up. And we did see a lot of that in the 2022 election, where students in Charlottesville or Blacksburg, Richmond, they showed up and registered to vote and voted at the same time. So I think making those programs known. We also now have a permanent absentee list. So like I signed up and I will automatically get my ballot mailed to me. I don't have to have an excuse. And we've seen a lot of Virginians sign up for that. And so I think we had 2 years where we had this trifecta with Governor Northam and a Democratic House and Senate, and we made a lot of progress on reproductive rights and voting rights. And so now it's really up to us to educate people about how voting rights have been expanded, and making sure they know that they can, vote during this long early vote window, that they can sign up for a permanent list. I think we have in the last several years too done better about getting polling places on college campuses, but it's always something that we need more help promoting and education. And with student groups too, it's really tough because of the turnover of you'll have great student leaders and then they graduate. So I think it needs a lot of constant cultivation to be successful.
Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? Well, how about from our wonderful presenters, any closing comments, ideas on popularizing even more so medication abortion as a solution? Other solutions? What are your favorite solutions? Notwithstanding, of course, federal legislation. Who wants to start? Shaina?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that I have anything additional really to say in closing, other than gratitude to all of you for caring about this issue enough to participate in this call. I mean, I think on the question of medication abortion, like that is the future of what abortion care will look like for many, many, many people. And it's a space where there's going to be a lot of activity over the next few months. There's litigation out of Texas related to medication abortion access. State legislatures are going to be tackling this issue from all sides, I think, over the next few months. So it's a space to keep our eyes on and to be really loud about. The science is very clear, but anti-abortion folks are really good at obscuring the science and using inflammatory rhetoric to make people feel afraid, and to whip up debate where there shouldn't be, like as they've done, as Jamie was talking about, in the Born Alive context. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep our eyes really open on how the narrative around medication abortion is shifting, and to be really vocal about its safety and effectiveness and the essential role that it plays in facilitating access to abortion. But that's all I have. So thank you all so much, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Shaina. Thank you all for having us. It's great to be here with y'all. Kind of on medication abortion, I'm excited about it being expanded to retail pharmacies. And I think we're already seeing how some folks that are against abortion are going to try to disrupt that in various ways. So I think being aware of that, and if there's ways to kind of counteract whatever they try to do to protest CVS and Walgreens and make it more difficult for people to access care, just making sure people are also hearing the other side of how important that access is. And for folks who are in Virginia or know Virginians, please encourage them to make their voices heard during this legislative session, and also getting involved in our elections in 2023, because for us, if we're able to win back a majority in the House and keep the majority in the Senate, then we can start to make progress again and make progress towards that constitutional amendment and not be having these fights on an annual basis. So, really wanting to make sure we have the right folks and right champions to protect the progress that we've made and really be a safe place to access care for Virginians, but also people in the South and across the country. So thank you again. And if folks have any kind of questions or follow up, happy to hear from you. And I'll put my email in the chat again.
Good. I'd like to announce a couple of clearinghouse follow-ups. We will be doing a summary of this meeting along with the video of the meeting in our next February newsletter. And so you'll be able to have access to all of it if you missed some of it. And also our next meeting in February will be February 28th. That's a Tuesday at noon, same Zoom format. And we're going to be focusing on the impact of the COVID-19 particularly on women and its lasting effect on virtual work situations and what that means, particularly for women. So we hope you will join us on February 28th. And our March meeting, instead of being the fourth Tuesday of March, will be the third Tuesday of March, March 21st. And our March meetings generally focus on Women's History Month. And the Women's History Month will feature a new exhibit and opening of the in-person exhibit at the Martin Luther King Library in DC. And it'll be on feminist history of Black feminists in Washington, DC. And it's sponsored by the National Women's History Museum, who's opening their first in-person museum display, along with their ongoing many excellent virtual exhibits. And we hope to have other museums and monuments focusing on women displayed there. That's March 21st. So please join us for both of those. And I want to again thank so much Shaina and Jamie. I'm really delighted that our young women leaders are taking charge of this very important issue and doing such an excellent job. And I want to thank you for participating and hope that this has been a valuable meeting for those of you who attended. And you can tell your friends to catch it by reviewing the video that we'll make available on the website and in our February newsletter. Any other comments from anybody? If not, then thank you, and we'll sign off.
Any
And
thanks?
Special thanks again to our presenters.
Couldn't be better. Any thanks? Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.